The departure board clicked like an impatient clock, each letter flipping into place with a sharp snap. The air inside the crowded train station smelled of iron, rain, and someone's too strong perfume drifting from the bench behind her. Clara sat alone on the cold wooden bench, knees pressed together, fingers wrapped tightly around a small, weathered suitcase. It wasn't heavy, at least not in weight, but it carried more than enough to crush her if she thought about it too much. On top of the suitcase lay a folded piece of crimson silk, the scarf. Her scarf. Her thumb brushed over its frayed edge. It was the same scarf she wore the night she promised the bride, her best friend since childhood, that nothing would ever come between them. A promise made under fairy lights, champagne fizz in their veins, both laughing as if life couldn't hurt them. Now the scarf lay between her palms like an object from another lifetime, useless and silent, but burning with memory. She kept her gaze fixed on the tracks, watching the wind tease strands of her hair across her cheek. People passed in blur, business suits, families with strollers, teenagers with tangled headphones, but she stayed perfectly still. Inside, her heartbeat was uneven, as if it kept pausing to remember something. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once. Twice. She didn't take it out. She already knew the messages were from them. Her eyes shifted to the far end of the platform. That's when she saw it, a bridal bouquet, crushed and abandoned near a trash bin, white petals bruised with grime. The sight lodged somewhere in her chest, making it hard to breathe. She thought of how her name had been erased from the wedding program. How the role of maid of honor had been handed to someone else without even a conversation, just a smiling group photo on Instagram, as if she'd never existed in their world. Her hands tightened on the suitcase handle until her knuckles blanched. A voice broke through the loudspeaker, garbled, distant, announcing the next train. She rose slowly, the suitcase tilting in her grip. The scarf slipped and brushed the floor before she caught it, holding it close to her chest. Someone brushed past her, muttering an apology. She didn't look at them. Her eyes were fixed ahead, on the steel rail stretching into a place she couldn't yet see. In the reflection of the station's glass wall, she barely recognized herself, eyes sharper, mouth set like a blade. The scarf trembled in her hands, though the air was still. By the time her train arrived, she already knew, she wasn't going there to celebrate. The train's doors sighed open, spilling warm air into the cold. Clara stepped inside, dragging her suitcase down the narrow aisle until she found an empty seat by the window. She placed the suitcase in her lap rather than overhead, one hand still resting on the scarf. Outside, rain began to slick the platform, blurring the bouquet she'd seen earlier until it looked like nothing more than a pale smudge. She leaned her forehead against the glass, letting the hum of the station fade into something distant. Her father's voice rose in her mind, soft, steady, always sure. People show their truth when they think you're not watching. She'd been 12 the first time he said it, as they sat on a park bench sharing a packet of biscuits. That was the same year he'd given her the small suitcase for her birthday, telling her, "One day, you'll take this somewhere important." She hadn't imagined important would feel like this, half escape, half mission. The scarf slid a little under her palm, and she remembered another night. A summer wedding by the lake. The bride-to-be, her best friend, had been tipsy, weaving through fairy lights, wrapping that same scarf around Clara's shoulders, whispering, "You'll be right next to me forever, right? Forever." Until she wasn't. A burst of laughter drew her attention to the aisle. Across the row, a man with kind eyes and an unreadable face was watching her. Not staring rudely, just observing, as if he'd noticed the way she kept touching the scarf. He said nothing. She said nothing back. But his gaze didn't waver. The train jerked forward, and outside the window, the world began to slide away. Towns, streets, and lit windows streaked past like secrets trying to keep up. Clara's stomach tightened. She had enough money for the trip, barely. Rent was overdue. The electricity bill was folded in her bag, unopened because she already knew what it said. But none of it mattered right now, not when the truth she carried burned hotter than fear. At the next stop, families crowded in. A little girl in a yellow raincoat ran into her grandfather's arms, squealing. A couple kissed like they'd been apart for years. Clara turned her face to the glass again, her reflection hollow-eyed. She had no one waiting at the end of this journey, not to welcome her, anyway. She felt the stranger's eyes on her again. Still quiet. Still intentional. When the conductor's voice crackled over the speaker, announcing a short delay before the final stop, she should have been impatient. Instead, her fingers froze around the scarf. The stranger shifted as if to speak. And Clara, without meaning to, smiled, confused, wary, almost breaking. The train's doors sighed open, spilling warm air into the cold. Clara stepped inside, dragging her suitcase down the narrow aisle until she found an empty seat by the window. She placed the suitcase in her lap rather than overhead, one hand still resting on the scarf. Outside, rain began to slick the platform, blurring the bouquet she'd seen earlier until it looked like nothing more than a pale smudge. She leaned her forehead against the glass, letting the hum of the station fade into something distant. Her father's voice rose in her mind, soft, steady, always sure. People show their truth when they think you're not watching. She'd been 12 the first time he said it, as they sat on a park bench sharing a packet of biscuits. That was the same year he'd given her the small suitcase for her birthday, telling her, "One day, you'll take this somewhere important." She hadn't imagined important would feel like this, half escape, half mission. The scarf slid a little under her palm, and she remembered another night. A summer wedding by the lake. The bride-to-be, her best friend, had been tipsy, weaving through fairy lights, wrapping that same scarf around Clara's shoulders, whispering, "You'll be right next to me forever, right?" Forever. Until she wasn't. A burst of laughter drew her attention to the aisle. Across the row, a man with kind eyes and an unreadable face was watching her. Not staring rudely, just observing, as if he'd noticed the way she kept touching the scarf. He said nothing. She said nothing back. But his gaze didn't waver. The train jerked forward, and outside the window, the world began to slide away. Towns, streets, and lit windows streaked past like secrets trying to keep up. Clara's stomach tightened. She had enough money for the trip, barely. Rent was overdue. The electricity bill was folded in her bag, unopened because she already knew what it said. But none of it mattered right now, not when the truth she carried burned hotter than fear. At the next stop, families crowded in. A little girl in a yellow raincoat ran into her grandfather's arms, squealing. A couple kissed like they'd been apart for years. Clara turned her face to the glass again, her reflection hollow-eyed. She had no one waiting at the end of this journey, not to welcome her, anyway. She felt the stranger's eyes on her again. Still quiet. Still intentional. When the conductor's voice crackled over the speaker, announcing a short delay before the final stop, she should have been impatient. Instead, her fingers froze around the scarf. The stranger shifted as if to speak. And Clara, without meaning to, smiled, confused, wary, almost breaking. The train rattled through open fields, the rain outside now heavy enough to smear the horizon into watercolor gray. Drops streaked the window, each one sliding down like it had somewhere more important to be. Clara traced one with her fingertip, feeling the cold through the glass. The stranger across from her shifted, leaning slightly forward. His shoes caught her attention, scuffed leather, the kind that had walked far too many miles without rest. A faint split along the stitching told her they'd been mended, probably more than once. When he reached into his coat for something, she caught the glimpse of a photo tucked in his worn wallet. It wasn't posed, just a quick capture of a woman standing in sunlight, shielding her eyes with one hand. The corner was bent, like it had been folded and unfolded too many times. He noticed her glance and tucked the wallet away without comment. But she'd seen enough to know that photo meant the same to him as the scarf meant to her, an anchor, and maybe a wound. Thunder rumbled faintly, miles away but getting closer. The rhythm of the train matched the rhythm of her thoughts, uneven, colliding. She wasn't supposed to care about strangers. She was supposed to keep her head down, carry the suitcase, deliver the truth she'd come to deliver, and leave. Yet something about the man felt like standing in front of a mirror she hadn't realized was there. She wondered what he saw in her. The scarf? The way her hands kept tightening on the suitcase handle? Or maybe he recognized the quiet desperation that made her spine straighten when it wanted to bend. A sudden sway of the train made their knees brush. The contact was small, accidental, but it jolted something between them. "You're going far?" His voice was low, almost cautious. She hesitated. "Far enough." He nodded, as if that answer made sense to him. His gaze drifted back to the window, but not before she caught something in his eyes: weariness, maybe guilt. Outside, lightning split the clouds in a crooked vein of white. She imagined the wedding hall she was headed toward, glowing warm against the storm, all dressed in gold and laughter. She imagined the moment she'd speak, the way faces would change when the truth landed. Her heartbeat was steady now, but it wasn't calm. The man's reflection in the glass seemed closer than it was in real life. For a moment, she thought about asking his story. But asking might mean answering, too. The rain thickened, drumming harder against the metal roof. She looked down at the scarf, his eyes still on her. Neither of them spoke again before the next station. The storm followed them into the city. By the time the train screeched into the final station, the sky was the color of bruised steel, and the rain had soaked everything it touched. Clara stepped onto the platform, suitcase in one hand, scarf in the other. Her shoes slipped slightly on the wet tiles. Around her, people rushed toward shelter, umbrellas snapping open, coats pulled tight, voices raised in hurried goodbyes. She paused under the station's dim canopy, staring at the street beyond. The wedding hall was only a short taxi ride away. She could be there in minutes. She could also turn around, walk into the opposite direction, and disappear into the city's back streets. Her chest tightened with the thought. The stranger emerged from the crowd, slower than the rest, rain glistening on his hair. He didn't approach her directly. He stopped a few paces away, leaning against a column as if waiting for someone else entirely. His eyes, however, found hers through the passing umbrellas. For a moment, she thought about just leaving, slipping into a cab, never seeing him again. But her feet stayed planted. A group of teenagers passed between them, laughing too loud. One of them glanced at her suitcase, then at her scarf, and smirked like he knew a story about her that wasn't true. She turned away, cheeks burning, though she had done nothing wrong. "Some people carry more than just bags," the stranger's voice came softly, almost lost in the rain. "They carry silence." Her fingers tightened on the scarf. "And some people notice things they shouldn't. Or maybe they've been looking for something they lost," he said, not moving closer. She didn't reply. Instead, she started toward the taxi stand, the sound of her suitcase wheels clicking over the uneven ground. But halfway there, she stopped. Something made her glance back. The scarf wasn't in her hand anymore. She saw it in his. He must have picked it up when she'd loosened her grip without realizing. He held it differently than she did, neither possessive nor careless, just steady, like it was meant to be returned when she was ready. The rain poured harder, drumming on the metal awning above them. She took a few slow steps toward him, her eyes locked on the scarf. Around them, strangers glanced briefly, the way people do when they sense a moment but can't name it. When she reached him, he extended it without a word. Their fingers brushed, and in that second, she almost told him everything. About the wedding, the betrayal, the truth in her suitcase. Almost. Instead, she took the scarf, wrapped it once around her wrist, and walked away. She didn't look back until she reached the street. He was still there. Watching. The taxi ride was short but restless. The scarf clung damp against her wrist, the silk carrying a faint trace of his touch she couldn't shake. She tried to focus on the wedding ahead, on the speech she'd prepared, the truth folded in her suitcase like a blade, but the storm in her mind was louder than the one outside. The car stopped in front of the wedding hall, its golden lights spilling into the rain-soaked street. She paid the driver, stepping out into the glow, her shoes splashing in shallow puddles. Inside, the air was warm and perfumed, a sharp contrast to the damp night. Music hummed from somewhere down the corridor, muffled by layers of walls and flowers. She followed the sound, passing a table stacked with glossy gift envelopes. That's when she saw it, an open program for the evening, printed in elegant gold script. Near the bottom of the page, in small but unmistakable letters, was the corporate sponsor for the event, Arden and Company. Her breath caught. That name. The job she'd applied for 2 weeks ago. The job she'd thought might be her way out of the bills, the overdue rent, the constant scraping by. And then she remembered the stranger's wallet, the worn photo, the way he'd spoken like he understood carrying silence. Arden. It couldn't be a coincidence. The scarf felt heavier now, as though the silk itself carried the truth. She glanced down at it, noticing for the first time the tiny stitched initials in the corner, L.A. She hadn't seen them before. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence. His voice echoed in her head, the same words, now sharper. She found an empty alcove and pulled out her phone. A quick search confirmed it, Leonard Arden. CEO. Widower. His only child, Lila Arden, had died 3 years ago in a car accident. Age 17. The news photo showed her wearing the same scarf. Clara's fingers trembled. The object she'd thought was hers, tied to her story, was tied to his in a way she couldn't have imagined. The music swelled, drawing her toward the ballroom. Guests in glittering dresses passed her, their perfume mixing with the scent of rain still clinging to her hair. She felt like she was walking underwater, each step deliberate, each breath heavier. She reached the wide double doors, light spilling through the crack between them. Beyond lay the bride, the guests, and every truth she could no longer avoid. Her pulse pounded in her ears. There was no turning back now, not from him, not from the secret, not from what she was about to do. Clara pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The ballroom glittered like it belonged to another world, one where betrayal could hide behind chandeliers and champagne flutes. The music paused just as Clara stepped in, her suitcase rolling behind her, the damp scarf still knotted at her wrist. Heads turned. Whispers rose like static. At the far end, the bride froze mid-laugh. For a split second, her smile faltered, the memory of their last argument flashing in her eyes. Clara's heart pounded, but she kept walking, each step echoing across the marble floor. She wasn't here to blend in anymore. She was here to end the lie. She stopped by the microphone stand, resting her suitcase at her feet. The weight of every pair of eyes pressed against her back. Somewhere in the crowd, she caught sight of him, Leonard Arden, standing near a table, hands folded, watching her with that same unreadable gaze from the train. Her fingers brushed the scarf. The silk was still warm from where his hand had held it. She swallowed. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I was supposed to be standing next to her, my best friend. But she replaced me." A ripple of discomfort passed through the guests. The bride shifted, eyes narrowing, but Clara went on. "I thought it was because I didn't matter. But then I learned something else, about the people we choose to stand next to us, and the ones we push away." Her eyes found Leonard's. The scarf tightened around her wrist. "I came here to expose her secret," Clara said, voice catching. "But I'm not sure anymore if that's the only truth I need to tell." She reached down, unzipping the suitcase. Inside, instead of papers or proof, lay a small velvet box. She lifted it carefully. The bride blanched, she recognized it. It was the missing gift meant for the groom, proof of a betrayal that could shatter the night. Clara held it for a beat, then turned away from the microphone. The gasp from the bride was almost drowned out by the murmurs. She crossed the floor toward Leonard. When she reached him, she placed the box in his hands, then unwrapped the scarf from her wrist and folded it gently. "It's yours," she said softly. "Always was." For the first time, his expression shifted, not relief, not anger, but something closer to recognition. "You remind me of her," he murmured. Not because you look like her, but because you don't let go. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a promise. Just a truth exchanged between two people who had carried silence for too long. Clara turned before he could say more. She walked past the bride without a glance, past the open doors, back into the rain-slick street. The city lights blurred through the drizzle, but her steps were lighter now, as if the suitcase was finally just a suitcase. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time Clara reached the station again. The night was hushed, emptied of the urgency that had followed her here earlier. Street lamps glowed in soft halos, their light pooling on the wet pavement. She sat on the same wooden bench from that morning, the one where she'd first held the scarf like a promise and a weapon. Now her wrist was bare. Her suitcase rested beside her. Lighter. Not because anything had been removed, but because she was no longer dragging herself inside it. Through the glass wall, she could see the quiet rails stretching into the dark, the same way they had before. Yet everything felt different. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. Leonard's voice lingered in her mind, tangled with her father's old words about watching people when they think you're not looking. She thought about the scarf, how it had once been a symbol of loyalty, then betrayal, and finally, of something neither of those words could fully name. It wasn't hers to keep. But its absence didn't feel like a loss anymore. A cleaner pushed a cart down the platform, giving her a polite nod before passing. Somewhere down the line, a bell chimed, soft and distant. Clara leaned back against the bench, breathing in the cool night air. She imagined the wedding hall still glowing, the music starting up again, the bride smiling for the cameras as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Maybe the guests wouldn't notice. Maybe they'd never know. But the truth had changed rooms tonight. She stood, lifting her suitcase. Instead of boarding a train, she walked toward the street, her shoes clicking against the tiles. Each step felt deliberate, not an escape, not a chase, but a continuation. Later, in the small apartment she called home, she placed the suitcase under her bed. The empty space where the scarf had been lay open in the top drawer of her nightstand. A shaft of moonlight spilled across it through the curtain, painting it silver. She let it stay empty. For a long moment, she just sat there, elbows on her knees, letting the hum of the city outside sink into the quiet of her room. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again. That wasn't the point. Some people arrive in your life like trains you don't plan to catch. And some leave behind a station you can't quite forget. The night was still, but her pulse felt steady now. She smiled faintly, not at anyone, not for any reason. Just because she could. Not every ending is about leaving. Sometimes, it's about what stays with you after.